Welcome in everyone. Today is a super exciting video because we get our first early access hands-on look at gameplay of Cities Skylines 2. We're going to be building our first city along with talking about many of the features and mechanics that you may be excited about. There's going to be more videos as a part of a series of early access content related to Cities 2, so hit the subscribe button so you can be notified for the next video, leave a like and drop a comment down below with any questions you have. Now because it's early access, I may be limited in what I can answer and what all I can say. Additionally, because it's early access, just keep in mind that this is not the release version of the game. This is still a work in progress. Now, with all that out of the way, I wanted to give you a really good look at what it's like to build your first city in Cities Skylines 2. I'm going to try to cover as much as I can in the time allotted, while also giving you as much of an organic look at the game as I can. Now, I'm going to disable tutorials and I'm going to use the North American theme. Otherwise, this is a pretty fresh playthrough. There's not really any other crazy things that I've adjusted besides making some settings changes to better accommodate recording. Now, the city isn't going to be built with a ton of planning. I'm kind of diving in head first. And every time that I've loaded into Cities 2, I've noticed something different about how this looks versus Cities 1. Something about the mountains feel more impressive. The bodies of water feel more natural. And every map's geography feels independent from the other. And the scaling in general in this game feels much more appropriate for what we're trying to build. Now I'm up to about 10 hours in the game as I've tried to master some of the basic mechanics and get a better understanding of how it operates. And what I've noticed is the starting square tends to not last as long. I'm filling that up rather quickly, but you do have plenty of squares to expand to as you progress your city. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that appreciates the much more realistic look that Cities 2 offers, especially in the vanilla base game. This is kind of exciting because in Cities 1 I tend to run a bunch of mods just to get something close to what I see in Cities 2, so it's refreshing to see this take. I would say the Terraform tool for the most part operates pretty similar to what you get in Cities 1, and with that I've also noticed that terrain changes in terms of height are much more smooth. It feels less jagged and compared to what you tend to get in Cities 1. I also feel like Cities 2 right off the bat is utilizing heights differently. What I found is that certain maps may have rivers that are significantly higher than other rivers. For example, we're working on this peninsula here, and one river seems to be much higher than the other river, although it looks very natural. Maybe this is just a me thing, but I felt that in Cities 1 I was often flattening out a lot of areas, and I still will probably do that in Cities 2. However, I feel more like I need to incorporate much of the height changes into the city build itself. So I think down here at our starting area, we're probably going to be focused on making a small town, and then maybe up by the upper river, which you'll see in a second, I'm going to be focused on creating the industrial area because I'm going to factor wind because air pollution is a thing. So I want the wind pushing the air pollution away from our city. Now, one of the biggest, most notable changes from Cities 1 to Cities 2 is the road functionality. First of all, they seem much more intuitive. However, there's a complexity there that's going to take a little bit of time to learn. As you may have heard in the dev diaries, there's a ton of options to control snapping and various aspects of road building. Now, it feels very comfortable to build something that's gridded. Just like in Cities 1, it's pretty easy and it's straightforward. When you start getting into more complex designs, while it still feels very approachable, it may take a little bit more time to master the tools that you need to do that very effectively or make it appear realistic. While right now you don't have everything unlocked right out of the gate, you do have enough to get yourself started. Cities 2 tends to give you a lot of information, especially about roads and how they are placed. While there does seem to be a lot of complexity there, they are very easy just to draw out roads. It feels very comfortable. Along with the information Cities 2 provides, it also gives you a look sometimes at what things are going to look like before you place a road. For example, in highlighting a road or something like that, you can get an idea of what it's going to look like. And you'll see a little bit more of that as we move forward. It kind of gives you an illustration of what you're doing. For example, if you're upgrading a road, it's going to show you what that road's going to look like. And then if you're making certain connections, it's also going to give you that appearance before you do it. While it may not always do what you're looking for it to do, it does feel integrated and smooth and gives you at least some sort of illustration or preview of what you're working on. I did notice that going from a wider road, let's say a 4-lane down to a 2-lane, could cause an offset intersection. And that was starting to become noticeable in some of the dev diaries and some of the content made earlier. It does seem like some of this may be remedied by turning off snapping. To some degree, I didn't feel as limited by nodes like I felt often in Cities 1. This feels much more free flowing and easier to manage. While having all of this data and information driven at you along with the snapping options, I think more advanced players are going to enjoy being able to turn that off and really start operating by freehand. But this does have a much different feel from Cities 1. It is something that is refreshing, but also has a little bit of a learning curve attached to it. And one of my favorite features of the new roads in Cities 2 is the incorporation of alleyways. I can finally build alleyways to fill in some of these awkward spaces without full-on roads going through these areas. Obviously, there were options available on the Steam Workshop for Cities 1, but I think this is really cool to have in base game Cities 2. Now, while we don't have all the options available, you can see that there are several tabs around roads, and like normal, you typically have different tabs referring to different size roads, along with the different road options that you can incorporate. So you can go in and you can change roads pretty much on the fly, which is an interesting concept, and I'll show you that here in a second. Now, like all cities that you build, you need to incorporate some sort of power. Obviously, you can import that, but I'm going to go ahead and set up a power station somewhere, preferably away from the city and hopefully where the air is blowing away from the city so we don't incorporate air pollution over our town. You can see as soon as I go to wind power, you can see where the wind is blowing. This became a big factor in the first city I built because I ended up putting the city downwind from the industrial area, which caused a ton of air pollution and people were not happy about it. Now, speaking of people not being happy about it, I actually turned off the chirper notifications so that they weren't popping up on the side, especially for the video, but also because I feel like for someone that has hours in cities, I kind of know what needs to happen and I can always click on it and check. Now, if you're familiar with Cities 1, sometimes turning off snapping can cause an issue when combining roads, but as you can see, turning off snapping here, the road automatically combines with no problems. I'm not getting some weird overlap in roads. I do feel like the road tools are a refreshing take. It's something different and it feels much more modern and less kind of bulky and non-informative, whereas this gives you a ton of information. It gives you previews. There's a lot going on, and I think it's going to take me a little while to master, so bear with me as I play around on this hill. Now, you may know already that there are multiple options for curved roads, and it depends on the complexity of the curved road. For example, if you're going to go back and forth several times. One thing I thought was really cool is how it implemented a retaining wall here next to my road, which is really cool and intuitive, although I do hope we're able to, kind of force that in certain situations later down the road where we can say, I definitely want this here, and I can incorporate the terrain behind it instead of doing it the other way around, if that makes sense. So let's go ahead and place a coal power plant down, and you can see that the building feels much more realistic than what we're accustomed to, both in size and the way it looks compared to Cities 1, and this is something that I'm very, very happy with. And this isn't just something limited to this one building. In fact, many of the ploppable buildings I've had a chance to look at all feel and look much more appropriate to what they should in real life, especially for a simulation game. One of my favorite features is being able to have roads that are powered instead of having to run power lines all across your map. I think this is fantastic, and I'm super excited to have this incorporated at base game Cities 2. This was a welcome addition to me because typically my power lines and pipes are just following roads anyway, so this is one less thing that I have to do that just doesn't really add a ton of value for me unless I'm detailing. I thought that the ability to trade water and power was actually kind of neat. In the early stages of building in a city, I could see how trading power would be actually really helpful to help balance your budget to some degree. I didn't see anything super surprising about how utilities functioned. Instead, it seemed to be pretty much what I would have expected. And while we're talking about services, I think it's important to mention that I really like the modular building functionality. I like being able to tweak a building that I've already placed to give it more capacity to handle things, or more functionality as your city grows. And this is extremely welcome so that we're not placing the same building down as many times. Instead, you can do these little upgrades that are modular components to what you already have. Now, as we zone, I don't think you're going to see something that's crazy unfamiliar. I think that the zoning squares go 6 deep is actually really a welcome change. It's not something that I put a lot of weight on early on in looking at the game. However, I really do kind of appreciate it now. I love that houses have driveways and backyards that have some amount of detail added to them. They feel a little bit more complete with the additional space allotted to them. Same with commercial, and that the commercial lots typically have some sort of parking area available to them, which is another neat addition. Something that I often did when I played Cities 1 was add parking. You guys are well aware of that. And with the diversity of buildings, I'm trying to find ways of zoning that help make the city look realistic, right? With appropriate transitions from like commercial to residential, and some of that just comes down to unfamiliarity with what buildings are available. But I think as the game grows and you continue to see assets added, I think there's opportunities to see a really diverse set of buildings, even housing and commercial, that are really going to make your city pop. But I do see instances where some buildings get a little bit repetitive unless you're able to create some sort of diversity in how you set them up. I also do really love that zoning is now broken up into more components. For example, you have low density residential, medium density residential. There's just so much variety in there, including mixed use, which gives you a ton more flexibility than we've had in the past. And I think it's going to be pretty important, especially as the game releases, if you're looking to get realism out of your city, is to mix those zones up well and consider how different types of zones blend with one another. I do really like that there's a construction component to zoning. So when you first place the zone down and it's taken up, there's sort of a crane that pops up. It's a dirt lot. I wonder if they're going to add more to that in the future. I'm not sure. but that would be pretty cool to see a little bit more added to that space in between the completed building and when you zone. I am really happy with how lots are placed in Cities 2. I like that the houses have a little bit of their own stuff, their own driveway, their own fences. These are things I would normally add via detailing, and now they're sort of incorporated into just vanilla play. I know plenty of folks are going to be looking at how the zone grids work and how different it may be from Cities 1 to Cities 2. Personally, it didn't always bother me. There are some times where I still see some of the broken grids that I see in Cities 1. However, I felt like Cities 2 was a little bit more manageable at times and correctable. And that's not really a scientific breakdown. I think with a few more hours, I may have a better grasp of how this operates, though it does feel a little bit different in terms of how it lays out your zoning grids. So quickly, let's talk about trees. Trees grow in Cities 2, so once you place them, they are not full size. So you may be looking at these saying, are those bushes? Well, no, they're actually trees, but they have to grow over time. This may be an adjustment for detailers. We tend to want to place fully grown trees down and really see what it's going to look like as we progress through our city. And right now you have to plan ahead, right? So you need to know sort of where some of those trees are going to go, place them early so that you can see them grow into place. I do hope there's a feature at some point to allow us to place fully grown trees so that we can instantly get the look of, a finished area versus having to wait for the trees to grow in. That's just a preference. So we should probably talk about the progression of your city through achievements and milestones. I found this to be much more intuitive. It seemed very in touch with what I was doing. It also didn't seem to drag out very long. The first few steps at least are pretty straightforward to get to. I think the XP system is pretty easy to understand, and it relates to so many other games that we're accustomed to, right? We're just building XP based on our city. So I felt like it was pretty approachable. Now with each milestone, obviously you're going to unlock things. For example, we've now unlocked a different type of zone in the medium density row housing. Along with cash, you'll get expansion points so that you can grow your city into different grid squares. Now keep in mind, each grid square costs an expansion point and cash. It's not one or the other. But I never felt like this was a significant issue to battle. Like I thought that everything seemed paced pretty well. And you can tell by selecting squares, you can see resources in that area along with the cost, quickly purchased, and your land is expanded pretty much like you'd expect. Now you also get development tokens when you reach milestones. These are used to unlock different things in your city. It could be buildings, it could be other features and things that you may need to expand your city. By checking the milestones tab, you can see what you're going to earn per milestone. This can be helpful to plot a course on your city and understand when certain things are actually going to show up. And of course, for achievement hunters, you do have your achievement tab, which breaks down how to get certain achievements. For now, I'm going to go back to the development tab, and I'm going to go ahead and use our 1 development point on advanced road services. This will give us some more flexibility with what we're doing with roads. In addition to modular buildings, you also have areas. This landfill, for example, has the option of being able to kind of set aside your own area for the landfill itself, which automatically gets a texture, and it's pretty much set up. You can always go back and adjust that area as needed. This is something you may have seen in some of the dev diary stuff around industries, specifically specialized industries. I don't know how many buildings actually utilize that across the board. Of course, there's some buildings I haven't even quite got to yet in my playthrough. However, that is something that could be really, really useful for buildings to use to create sort of customized shapes for their property. And once again, I have to say that I'm pretty pleased with the scale of a lot of the buildings in cities too, especially service, utility buildings, and things like that. They tend to take up a little bit more room. They don't feel, tiny like some of the buildings in Cities 1 tended to feel after a while, especially when putting things down like clinics. Plus, with the modular building, you can kind of add to it and you can scale it up a little bit more. And then when you need this building again, for example, if you need multiple clinics around your city, you could have some that have certain modular buildings and some that don't. So you create a little bit of diversity in what you're placing just by how you're setting it up. Now that we've unlocked additional road tools, you can see that we have options for what we can do with roads. Now there's some traffic options and there's also some sort of detail-oriented options, right? We can go in and aesthetically change the roads pretty much on the fly, and it gives you a preview of what that's going to look like before actually doing it. Here we can add widened sidewalks, crosswalks, trees, grass, and even lights. It's also interesting that you can do these things on just one side of the road. It doesn't have to be both sides. By hovering over one side, you can apply the change, and then you can also remove it by right-clicking on that side. It's a very easy tool to use, and I like how it gives you a really nice preview of what to expect. Now, I could totally see this being something they could build off of. I don't know what all you could add to this, but Being able to change textures or different types of things might be really cool in the future. I guess we'll just have to see. Something else I was happy to see in Cities 2 was the fact that your demand meters are more specific. As you unlock new zones, you're going to see that it's broken up a little bit differently from what we're accustomed to in Cities 1. It's going to tell you how many of your sims need different types of zones, not just low density residential, but they also may want medium density. And I felt like demand was very, very reactive to what I was doing. If I raise or alter taxes, I can immediately see the effect on demand. Additionally, by placing zones, it seemed very reactive to that in a very quick manner. So it's easy to see the progress I was making, which also helps because your progress is going to lend itself to progression in your city. And ultimately, that's what we're all after, is progressing our city to unlock more of the things. This isn't the only area where I feel like Cities 2 excels at giving you more information or, more specific information, right? There's also a lot of data that seems to be behind what's going on in your city, or at least it's broken up in a way that's very easily understood. Just by going to the City Economy tab, you can start to see how this data is calculated. And again, it feels very informative, and I do feel like I have better control over what I'm doing. And as you progress your city, you're going to be able to unlock more of these tabs to continue to control and oversee how your city operates, which I think is going to be huge for folks that really enjoy the simulation side of city building. I also thought milestones felt rewarding, at least for now. They seem like something that's kind of fun to hit because then you have development points and you can sort of control where your city is going or what you want to focus on next. It makes it seem like you're more involved, like you're more hands-on with your city build. And like I said, I may have somewhere close to 10 hours in this game, and I have not played with unlimited money. I've only been kind of going through the progression and trying to understand how certain decisions may affect the city. And because there's development points and sort of a tech tree that you have to unlock, your progression and the decisions you make may affect how your city is going to be built, or may tailor more towards what you're trying to set up in any given situation. For example, if you're building 2 small towns, you may need to focus on certain things different from a large-scale city. This is all pretty obvious, but it still gives you those options to direct what you're wanting to do and customize the experience in the base game. As one might expect, you do need to be careful about how you operate your city and your expenses. Service buildings can obviously get pretty expensive, and then the modular aspects that you can add to certain buildings can raise the cost of that service. So you just need to be mindful about where you're spending money and how you're spending it, because it's easy to get a pretty big debt going, which I have done in the city. But obviously for this purpose, I think it's very helpful for you guys to see a lot of what's happening very naturally. I'm excited to see what folks make out of some of the challenges and the development and progression of their cities. I can definitely see this being an opportunity for a bunch of YouTube videos to pop up about how quickly people go from some small town all the way through the different milestones in Cities 2. And really, it's all about your Sims' happiness and the growth of your city. Those are 2 things you're going to need to prioritize to continue to get development points and continue to make milestones in your city's progress. Early on, I did spend a little bit extra time in the development tab trying to decide where I wanted to go with certain things, what things I wanted to focus on and put in the cities. I wasn't so worried about highways for right now as much as I just wanted to see different buildings, but that's just me. And some of those buildings are also going to play a big effect on how your city operates and your progression. Like this, we're now at Large Village, unlocking more cash, development points, and expansion points. And with this recycling center, obviously you get more modular parts you can add to the building to expand its capability. And the same time that we're growing our city, we're also burning a hole in the city's budget. It might be wise to raise taxes on a couple things while also expanding the city a little more rapidly. Now, there's a few things I want to jump to show the features more specifically, including pedestrian paths. These operate very differently in Cities 2. They operate more like a network in my opinion, whereas in Cities 1, it's sort of like a path you're just painting down. And you can see that there's multiple ways that it can be attached to another network, specifically a road. Which in this case, being attached to a road, it can also add a crosswalk, which is a kind of a neat feature. The only issue I would see is that I hope that at some point we can integrate it more closely with buildings, because right now it gives you the overlap indication. Now, sometimes things don't always line up as you'd expect, and I think that's just a matter of polishing. However, they do feel much more precise when laid down. I feel like this is going to appease a lot of folks that wanted more precision with how they did their parks and pedestrian pathing. Additionally, I feel like the intuitiveness of the road, which again, I know I've used that word a lot, but that's the best way to describe this, and how it adapts to you doing something next to it could be a huge feature that can be built on later. I'm really excited to see where that could go. And of course, you have pedestrian roads, which are going to operate very similarly to what we have in Cities 1. So I definitely need to figure out how to incorporate these into our town, but one thing I wanted to point out is how the pedestrian paths work with pedestrian roads along with some functionality I saw with networks in some of the dev diaries. Specifically how you can overlap networks, right? So I've seen roads overlapped on top of other things and they just kind of work. You don't have to worry about that. They integrate. And we've seen a little bit of that in some of what we've done, how quickly roads can just be merged together. But I think this is a really cool feature. It makes it a little bit more free-forming, I feel. Like you can kind of just adapt to your terrain and ideas as you go. And look how easy it is. Just overlapping two networks and it adapts to what you're doing. I think this is super cool. Even at an angle, it adapts appropriately. And I was really happy to see this. I think this is going to lend itself well, especially to new players, or if you're just trying to build things with a little more freedom. And something that I really liked was how smooth exit ramps are off highways. I haven't dove super far into this, but just in playing around, I noticed that this feels much more natural versus what we've seen in Cities 1, especially without mods. This just seems really fluid and natural, and I'm super stoked to see this integrated into the game the way it is. Another portion of the game that I sort of want to highlight here is specialized industry, and this works vastly different, in my opinion, from Industries DLC, at least in terms of how you lay it out and set it up. Over time, I became a pretty big fan of Industries DLC, mainly because of the variety of buildings it gave you and the ability to plop them down all over the place and create really dense areas of industry. Much like Industries DLC in Cities 1, you're putting down like a main building, right? And then you're selecting an area where you can pull the resources, and you're typically going to place this area over where the resources are abundant. And you have sort of a zone around that main building that you can actually place your area that you're going to pull the resources from. Now, once you place your area and you go out of the sort of build mode for the building, you're going to see that it's going to create a new texture on the ground. And for farms and livestock, it's going to be something similar. It's going to look like a farm, which I think is pretty cool. My only concern is where buildings tend to grow into that space. There's not really much control in terms of being able to move the building and then piece kind of like a network together to make all the buildings seem like they're working together. If I could just draw a dirt path or something between them, I think this would be awesome. Now let's take another look at how modular buildings operate. You've seen a little bit of this in the dev diaries, and we've talked a little bit about it so far. They're going to give additional functionality, or they're going to add capacity. So there's a reduction in the need for redundancy of buildings, and instead you can upgrade certain buildings to have these features. I think this is a really great foundation for something that can be built on later down the road in Cities 2. And modular building affects a wide range of buildings in your city. For example, we just saw education. It can also affect your landfill. Just beyond expanding your landfill, it can also have more functionality and increase capacity. And I love that these modular aspects are diverse in terms of what they look like and what they're capable of. You sort of feel like every building can then develop its own little identity, its own footprint within your build. I think it's safe to say that this might be one of my favorite features in this game. And I just think the possibilities are pretty endless, man. This can go really far if it's utilized well. Beyond functionality, I wanted to highlight this because it does go into planning your city. You're going to have to account for these buildings potentially needing more space than what's already allotted. And I'm a big fan of the idea that scale is important and buildings should feel like they are big for certain activities or certain functionality. Now back to our city build, and as you can see, we've grown and we've created a little bit of an issue of debt. So you can always go in and obviously and request loans. You can do taxation adjustments, pretty much stuff you'd expect. But I do feel like you have a little bit more control over specific things and how you want them to operate or affect your city, which is always nice, especially if you're someone diving into more of the nitty-gritty when it comes to simulation. I definitely think there is some things you're gonna have to do to maintain, and obviously I could be expanding this city at a much faster rate given where our demand is and stuff like that, but I've been kind of taking my time and just really trying to enjoy the process. And don't get me wrong, I have enjoyed the process. There has been some things that I've had to learn, and there's some quirks like any other game has, until you start to figure out some of the functionalities and some of the things that maybe Cities 2 prefers in terms of how it operates. And regardless of a time constraint, I knew that it was going to be really hard for me to dive into every functionality, every bit and piece that you guys are going to want to see. So I wanted to focus more so on the initial building steps. Like, what does that look like, to give you an idea or a more hands-on look at how the cities started and how they sort of function. And then of course I wanted to highlight a few features and things that I knew I wasn't really going to get to in the build, but that I thought were interesting that I've seen from some of the other cities and some of the other time I've spent in game, just by playing around and messing with some features. So while I'm going to continue to expand the city, I want to talk a little bit about my first and overall impressions of what I've seen from my gameplay in Cities Skylines 2. The first thing you're going to notice is things like the UI and the overall aesthetic of the game, and I think they're pleasing. I do enjoy the more realistic approach, and while the new UI feels much more modern and clean, it doesn't feel unfamiliar. I think a lot of folks are going to have that experience where things feel familiar but different. They feel a little bit improved or more modernized versus what we're accustomed to in Cities 1, which has been out for nearly 10 years, and it's had over 10 years of development post-launch. When I start looking at things like mechanics and the functionality, there are some new and updated things that I think give a really good foundation for a very new experience. For example, modular buildings. I mean, there's no telling how far that functionality can go. Things like road tools and how they're sort of updated, but they still remind you of what you're accustomed to in Cities 1. However, the functionality is better, the intuitiveness is better, and it sort of understands and is more approachable for all kinds of players. Now, from the dev diaries and from gameplay, I can tell that there's a lot of information behind what Sims are doing and how your city operates. And while maybe a lot of the decision making causes some concern, right? Maybe there's too much going on in the background. However, I also see a flip side of that, and that having all of this information sort of built in and being processed in the background early on in the base game lends itself to expandability in the future. Having all of this information and data along with functionality in the base game is significant for what can be done with the game later in DLCs, content creator packs, and who knows what else. I will say this, and I think this is probably the most important thing I can offer after several hours in the game, and again, there's still so much for me to dive into. But I think that if you're looking at Cities 2 as a continuation of Cities 1, then you're looking at it incorrectly, and this is something that I have also done. I was looking at Cities 2 as potentially being kind of the culmination of Cities 1 with some new bells and whistles and a little bit of a new platform to build off of. But I don't think that's a fair assessment at all, because again, Cities 1 has had 10 years post-release for continued development, DLCs, and all kinds of new features, buildings, and things to be added. Whereas what we're getting with Cities 2 feels like a much stronger platform. I sense that the floor for this game and its ability and what it can do is much higher than Cities 1. Additionally, the ceiling is significantly higher. And none of that should be really that surprising. And I'm just talking about capability, because when you start to look at the tools and you start to break them down and how they operate and how specific some areas are getting, for example, the levels at which we can break down zones, you start to see that there's more possibilities for how things can be mixed and how things operate. Things just feel more specific and data-driven and somehow still approachable and intuitive. The pace at which the game operates feels comfortable. Nothing about it really feels like it is a complete departure. So I don't want you to think that Cities 2 is just not Cities 1 at all. Again, there's some elements that are going to create crossover and that'll be familiar, but I just don't think looking at Cities 2 as just a continuation of what we've already gotten is very fair to Cities 2. The foundation of what I've been able to mess with in the game is much different, it's much stronger, and there's a really wide range of possibilities we could see as the game progresses. And one final thing that I noticed from my early gameplay in Cities 2 is that it felt alive. My cities felt like they were a breathing thing, like they operated based on the Sims' needs. I didn't feel like I was a bystander or that the Sims were just a bystander to whatever I did. There was sort of a reactionary element to it. And keep in mind, these are just my initial thoughts. I've only got roughly 10 hours into the game, if that, and I've only started to scratch the surface to some degree. I think overall I've been pretty pleased with what I've seen, and I'm really excited to see how this game continues to get updates as it reaches release, along with what happens in the immediate future for Cities 2. There's so much opportunity here, and I know we're all really excited to get our hands on it and dive in, and I'm super stoked to see what you guys are able to create. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be more videos as a part of this series of early access to Cities 2. And the plan is to expand the city further and see where it goes. That way we can continue to its functionality in a very organic way, giving you a pretty good impression of what the city build is going to be like once the game fully releases. And I hope you guys do enjoy this sort of more organic approach. I wasn't really trying to make some master city or pretend like I knew the game to some crazy extent. I am still learning, and I just wanted to set up something that I could share with you guys. And I'm hoping that basically what we can do is come back in another episode and go in and maybe tweak some of what we've established, maybe grow, and continue to dive into different tools and how they operate, because we're going to have so much more we can cover in future videos. Now I'm going to queue up some cinematics, but I want to remind you to leave a comment down below with your thoughts and questions, and I'll try to answer what I can, along with anything that you may want me to cover in future episodes. Of course, be sure to check the community tab for any polls I might post or information regarding the future episodes. And as always, like the video, hit the subscribe button if you are new to the channel, and I will catch you all next time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed our first look at Cities 2.